For a dungeon master, difficulty classes in D&D can be tricky to work with. How hard do you want it to be to pick this lock? What if you want more nuance than just easy, medium, and hard at 10, 15, and 20? And what do those words even mean in the context of a character really trying to do something? It can be even trickier when you start thinking about DCs above 20 for truly difficult things, if you want to challenge the characters at higher levels in the campaign. I've done some research and even some math, and I've got some answers for you. I'm Dave, and this is the one and only RPG Rundown. Let's begin by putting things into a bit of a context. It's important to remember that, like everything in D&D, the concept of ability checks and DC targets is abstract. It isn't meant to be precise or take into account every single possible factor in a real situation. It needs to work well enough to make the game feel challenging, fun, and satisfying, and that's really it. What this means is DCs are not an area where D&D is trying to simulate reality in any truly accurate way. Think of it more like gauging the believability of something working in a story about heroes. So it's meant to be an abstraction of reality, not a true model. It paints things in broad four-color strokes, and that's so that it's manageable to tell a fun, spontaneous group story with some ups and downs and unpredictable moments. D&D games weren't meant to play out as documentaries about medieval life, but to tell fun stories. If you're familiar with the GNS idea, it's fair to say that D&D is far more gamist and narrativist than it is simulationist. And if you're not familiar with the GNS thing, don't worry, I'll be doing a video very soon covering what it's all about. Now let's talk about the words that the Player's Handbook uses to describe different breakpoints in DCs. They call a DC of 5 very easy, 10 easy, 15 medium, 20 hard, 25 very hard, and 30 nearly impossible. Now, if you look around on the internet, you'll find no lack of opinions about how to set DCs. I've seen a number of posts and videos where people complain that these terms are inaccurate and they suggest different labels, such as calling 15 hard instead of medium, since with no modifiers, you have a 30% chance of success to roll 15 or higher on a 20-sided die. Well, personally, I find the PHB labels helpful, and I'll tell you why. It's all in how you think about it. And words like easy, medium, and hard may not be totally relative, but they do leave a lot of room for interpretation. Let's say, for example, I have very average dexterity and no training in catching a baseball. In game terms, I'm describing having no modifier. Now let's say you throw me a baseball from about 10 feet away. Now, catching a ball like this doesn't feel like a hard or even medium hard task in my mind. I may or may not think of it as easy, but the reality is I'm not going to catch that ball every single time. It might even be that I catch it about half the time, which is about like a DC 10 with a 55% chance of success. Basically, I'm saying that in real-world terms, catching the ball every single time it's tossed to me, sure, would be hard. But toss it several times and I'm going to catch it one or more of those times. So from that perspective, my odds of catching it on any single throw don't really make it feel hard or even medium to me. But again, it's an abstract idea. Now, I did watch one video where they went so far as to say there's no reason to ever make a character with no modifier roll against a DC of 5 because the chances of failure are too minimal to matter. First of all, I'm not sure that's true because a 20% chance of failure, while small, isn't really insignificant. But more importantly, it can be fun to make a player roll if there are consequences for failure at all. Imagine an accomplished bard invited to the palace for a very important performance of a song before the king or queen of the realm. Everything is riding on that single performance. A failure here would be significant to the story, even if it's unlikely. This brings me to my next point. D&D isn't a game where we come up with excuses to roll dice because we just really love to roll dice, even though we do love to roll dice. They're definitely important to the game, and polyhedrals are so iconic now that you can buy oversized plushy versions of them. But here's the important thing. Dice are there to support the game and the story you're building, not the other way around. A great rule of thumb about when to roll for something is to roll when there's pressure of some kind, like having limited time, or there are other consequences for failure. If not, remember that 5e has passive checks, which are pretty similar to what was called taking 10 or taking 20 in D&D editions 3 and 3.5. Here's an example of how passive checks work. If you've stolen a chest and hold it back to your safe and provisioned hideout, and that chest doesn't have any traps, then picking the lock with thieves' tools and appropriate proficiency shouldn't be that hard if you can keep trying it over and over. In this case, You add 10 to the bonus and see if the total is higher than the lock's DC. If it is, the thing is opened, we don't bother with a die roll, and we say that a period of time has passed with those repeated efforts. Why is a passive check like that useful? Because, frankly, it's uninteresting to force the player to sit there and roll a die, say 10 or 20 times until they get a success. There's no pressure and no consequence for failure, so it really doesn't serve the story in any way. But let's get back to talking dice and the odds of the DCs. For me, because words like easy, medium, and hard are so open to interpretation, I prefer to think of DCs in terms of their odds of success expressed as percentages. This also allows you to think in more nuanced ways than just always going for 5, 10, 15, or 20 as a DC. I made this chart showing the odds of success for an unmodified roll against any DC up to 20. Keep in mind, this is for a character with an average capability in what they're trying to do. In other words, no modifiers. How difficult is it for that person to find this hidden door? Maybe it was hastily put together and not well concealed. That feels like around a 45% chance to me, which is a DC of 12. Of course, the disadvantage to this approach is that there's more to think about, but over time, you get to know the chart and even just start to get a gut feel for the target number directly. But I think it has advantages over the broad brush approach of thinking about keywords like normal and falling back on 5-step increments. Now here's the last thing I want to cover, which is thinking about DCs above 20. As character levels get higher, your characters will depart significantly from ordinary people and become truly impressive heroes. What if you want to challenge such a hero with something that is difficult for them, not for an average person? The higher their bonuses get, the larger the gap between them and averageness, which makes it really tough to keep going by, well, this is how much chance an ordinary person has to do this thing. Why? Because the ordinary person, by definition, has no chance of success past a DC of 20 at all. So it starts to feel like averageness flattens out and becomes an unhelpful anchoring point. This question of how to set DCs for higher level characters has been asked a fair amount on the internet, and without fail, some purists will respond that it doesn't matter how hard it is for the character because DCs are only to be thought of as how hard it is for an average person. I get the idea here, but to me, slavishly adhering to this idea past DCs of 20 isn't really helpful for the reasons I just explained. I think it's totally reasonable for me to say to myself while planning a game session, hey, I really want to challenge this 6th level thief who also has gloves of thievery for a total modifier of +9 to pick a lock. It's no fun if I constantly give them DC 15 locks. So I decide that they're going to come up against a lock designed by a master craftsperson to secure some truly legendary item or person behind it, the best locksmith in the kingdom. How hard is it for an unskilled person to pick that lock? Well, it's probably going to be over 20, so it's literally off the chart. That person has no chance to open it. But what about our amazing hero and party member Nightblade, the celebrated thief with the gloves of thievery? How do we figure out what isn't too easy, but also isn't too challenging for them? At this point, it's time to go right to thinking in odds. The idea that target numbers go higher than 20 is such an abstraction, it's really kind of an illusion. It's just a way of rolling up difficulty numbers, but still using a 20-sided die with exactly 20 possible results. Let's say the DC for some action is 21, and a character with a +1 bonus wants to attempt it. In reality, there is no 21 to get on the die. What the player really needs to roll is a 20, so their odds of success are 1 in 20 or 5%. This is exactly the same chance they would have if they had no bonus and the DC was 20. Now, that's a lot of head math. You don't want to have to do a lot. But for planning, you're generally only worried about a certain number of actions, like picking locks, finding traps, tracking, or finding hidden doors. You can keep track of your PC's modifiers for just these things, and then I've also built a handy chart for your reference. Along the left are DCs up to 30, and along the top are modifiers. So if I'm trying to make a lock reasonably challenging for Nightblade, the Master Thief, to pick, I think maybe a 30% chance of success is good. If Nightblade has a +9 proficiency bonus, that's a DC of 24 on our chart. Now, I know a two-dimensional chart like this isn't a super easy thing to use quickly, but it's better than doing the math in your head. And I also think that over time, you'll get a feel for those ranges and won't need to check the chart so much. Honestly, I've been wrestling with this post-20 DC problem so much lately that it's what prompted me to make this video, and preparing for this video is what resulted in me coming up with this chart. So I'm going to give this a try in my own games and see how it goes. If I come up with changes or better ideas, well, those will be future videos. So that's it for how to think about and set DCs in Dungeons & Dragons. See the description for a link to download copies of these odds charts for your own reference. We always appreciate your likes and subscribes, and please do leave a comment below with your thoughts on handling DCs or these ideas I've presented about how to think about them. I'm Dave, and until next time, may all your 20s be natural.